I would love to see people like institutionalize love.
Hmm.
And I sometimes that just seems really like woo woo, but Dr. King had this quote where he would say power without love is like reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic.
Yeah.
And so I take that to mean that it's one thing to say that we love ourselves and that we love each other,
Mhm.
but we actually need systems and strategies and organizations and institutions that really embody love.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Living Room Wisdom, where your story is your glory. I am so thrilled to introduce you today to Dr. Hadiya Sewer. She is an Africana philosopher, a decolonial feminist, and a conscious business advisor based out of the St. John's, U.S. Virgin Islands. So, first off, I want to be where you are, even though I live in California. I'm pretty obsessed with the Virgin Islands. I would love to first start off by you're from there, correct?
Correct.
I'd like to know your experience growing up in the Virgin Islands. Like introduce who you are as Hadiya Sewer, not the academic, but who you are as Hadiya Sewer and what it was like growing up in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah, Katrina, first of all, I'll start by saying thank you so much for having me. And thank you also for curating this space and this community. I feel like there's just so much warmth, and I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. And I'll say that growing up in the Virgin Islands was a gift.
I can
I joke
imagine.
that if reincarnation is real and I'm coming back, I would come back to the Virgin Islands again and again and again. And
Yeah.
so St. John, of course, is the smallest island within the United States Virgin Islands.
Didn't know
It's
that.
over two-thirds national park. So most of the island is a eco conservation area. And we are just, because our population is so small, under 5,000, it was very community oriented, family driven. It was one of those communities where everyone knew your parents. And
Uh-huh.
so when I was down the road as a child or a teenager, it was easy for people to say, oh, that's, Llewellyn
Mhm.
Macia's daughter. That's Big Lou's granddaughter. That's Altira Fret's granddaughter. That's so and so's niece. And
Mhm.
so that level of like rootedness and family and place, even in like environment, and
Yes.
just having so much nature all around you, I felt very strongly that, you just grew up. St. John is called Love City. And I think there's a reason for that. And so it was pleasant to have just such a strong community, such a strong culture. And then we, of course, had a whole bunch of challenges with our infrastructure, with feeling a little bit sometimes isolated in the world, with having this kind of like unequal relationship with the US and not having like full voting rights. And so there's this interesting dynamic of having so much love in your community and then facing so many challenges together.
Yeah, because you're a part of the US, but there's this feeling of separation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we're
Interesting.
US territory. We have a non-voting rep in Congress. We aren't able to vote for the president of the United States while in the territory. But of
Really?
course, yeah, yeah. But all of those, federal policies impact us. And so
Yes.
we are a
Wow.
part of, but foreign in a domestic sense,
Mhm.
like the legal language. Yeah.
That is fascinating. And by the way, this is like totally turned into a commercial for St. John's because now I want to come visit. Like I was telling you before we started recording, I've been to St. Thomas and I've been to St. Croix, but I haven't been to St. John. And I can only equate the way that you spoke about how you grew up and what that felt like and just the environment to how I felt the first time I went to Belize.
Mhm.
Literally, I felt like I had found home, right? Because of the environment, because of the people, because of the culture. Like there was just this overwhelming feeling of love when I arrived there. And I do remember feeling that in St. Thomas as well, but it's just that it's been so long since I've been to St. Thomas and St. Croix. But with that said, how did it shape you as a person? And you may not have anything to compare this to because you grew up there, but how did it shape you as a person to grow up on an island that is predominantly our folks, for one, right? Seeing representations of yourself and then also being in such a small community where everyone knew everyone. Were there any patterns that developed? Like I know for myself, I grew up in New York City, but in Manhattan, believe it or not, and as huge as that city is, it was very what you described, where the person at the bodega knew who I was. Like it didn't matter where I was in that city, it was getting back to my mom, right? Whatever I was doing, right or
Right.
wrong. And so for me, I know it really it developed within me as kind of being the good girl and becoming somewhat of a people pleaser in a lot of ways because of a lot of different circumstances. So, what about for you? Because under 5,000 population is crazy. And so how did you develop as a person growing up in that?
That's such a great question, in part because, yes, it does plant the seeds of
Yes,
some people pleasing and being a good girl, because there's the reputation and the understanding that you aren't just a representative of yourself. People know you as belonging to a particular family or a particular
yes,
city. And then I would have to say that the other side of this is I think it instilled a lot of confidence in me as a person, because here is an entire community of people who love you, who really believe in you, who are radically committed to holding you accountable for
ooh,
whatever they feel like you're doing that's out of alignment with your integrity. And then also, I joke that it made me an organizer.
yeah,
In part because we, or at least I, spent a lot of time with like our elders,
yes.
just hanging out in their yards, going to pick fruit from their trees. And so I got to listen to a lot of the critiques that they had about power. I got to pay attention to all of the ways that they were fighting and pushing back. And then it became really natural to want to help and to pitch in and to, help draft this op-ed, help write this petition, show up at the legislature when this particular issue is happening. And I also joke that my St. John elders really threw me into the deep end of organizing, because I remember being like a teenager and sometimes complaining, and they would just like dial the representative's office and just hand me the phone and say, okay, hey, Hadiya, do something about it.
Wow.
And so it really, I think, strengthened my confidence in myself as a
Got
person.
roots, girl,
Yeah,
roots.
being able to say that we can, if there's something that has to be done, we can do it.
Yeah.
Somebody can do it. We can step in. We have agency.
I admire that on levels I can't even articulate because while there are challenges being born and bred in St. John and being a part of the US, but not feeling a part, like having that separation, like we kind of led with, on the flip side of that, being an African American, we don't have those same roots. We were not instilled with that same confidence and that, you know what I mean? And so I always admire people who have that grounding, and the accountability and the representation that you speak of. And you are an old soul. Absolutely. It has developed you in ways that you weren't going to be able to develop just, reading a book. And yet you have this whole academic history, it sounds like, that has also further shaped you and enriched who you are as a person today. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, the journey, I went to Spelman undergrad. And so I did my BA in sociology. And one of the things that I have to say about Spelman is it's just like a very special place, in the sense that it's a historically Black college and university, it's a women's college. And it was also this environment where I felt like we were really loved, really cared for. And there was this fostered sense that we can change the world through our care, through our service, through our academic work. And so I had the pleasure and the privilege, really, of being able to study under some really fabulous people at Spelman. As I always think of Dr. Cynthia Neal Spence, Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftal was still teaching also when I was at Spelman. And we really, I think I got a clear sense of, being able to study society and not take for granted like certain assumptions about how our societies operate, how humans interact, and why, and to be able to leverage that to keep improving our environments and our communities. I thought that that was really great. And while I was at Spelman, I got this really cool fellowship called the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship for people who are interested in entering academia. And it really just helped me to prepare for the possibility of getting the PhD. And so I did my thesis in undergrad on like constitutional development in the Virgin Islands. And then I went straight through to Brown in Africana Studies. And that allowed me to kind of deepen into Africana and Afro-Caribbean philosophy, thinking a lot about political status in the Virgin Islands, what it means to be a colony of the United States, what it means to be a predominantly Black community, and then why exactly we're still a colony and haven't necessarily advocated yet for independence or self-determination, like what keeps us in this particular space
Uh-huh.
politically. And so that was a bit of the academic journey. But I think it's always like a privilege to be able to make a life of doing the work that feels like purposeful, but also that feels like really impactful. And so I think I've just been grateful that
Yeah.
I can dedicate time
Hmm.
to studying issues that impact my community and then, crafting solutions.
Wow. It's interesting because the whole time you're speaking, it's almost like poetry in motion. It's like an art, like it's like a canvas that you're painting, and the picture is so beautiful, right? It seems like you've had this very blessed journey, and we're all having a human journey as well. So I know there has got to be some experiences, some challenges, whether you experienced them yourself or that you saw happening around you that really deepened that purpose. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, there's so many. And one of perhaps the most salient ones is that in 2017, the Virgin Islands was hit by Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which
Mhm.
were two Category 5 hurricanes, climate induced, as far as we can tell from the shifts in climate change that hit us like back to back within like a 2 week period. And so I was at home in the Virgin Islands doing my field work for my dissertation at the time. I was also like very pregnant with my second child. And
Eesh.
it was in many ways just like utterly devastating, right? To live through and to see the impact that it had on our community. It has taken us years to attempt to recover. And I say attempt because we're not fully
Mhm.
recovered in many ways. We can still see like the lingering impacts of those hurricanes. But it was just one of those moments where you become acutely aware that, of course, climate change, environmental issues, they're not just like hypothetical. They are a lived reality for so many communities, especially frontline communities, many of which are Black and Brown people across the globe, and lower income communities. And so it was hard.
Yeah.
Um, we also face like an energy crisis in the VI. And so we have these rolling power outages that, we have not yet stabilized.
Hmm.
Um, and so when you really kind of deal with that lived reality of poverty, and also the structural, bigger societal issues that then exacerbate people's lived reality, like it creates so many challenges.
Hmm.
Uh,
I have a question, and
mhm,
and here it is. For myself, part of the reason that I don't allow myself to go down a lot of these rabbit holes, like climate change and just all of the injustice and things that are going on in the world, there is a part of me that, in order to, and I hate to say it, protect my peace, but I like to protect my peace, but also things I don't quite fully understand, right? So how is it that you're able to work in this space and attack these issues without getting overwhelmed and without getting um, like losing hope in a lot of ways, right? Because it takes a level of focus, it takes a level of purpose and determination to work in those spaces and have your voice heard and to really bring about change. And
Mhm.
so how do you do that? And you have children, and you're an entrepreneur, so you're dealing with clients, you probably have your partner, like you have a lot going on. And so just tell me a little bit about how you manage that and how you stay focused on one or two issues instead of the 50 million that exist.
Right. Actually, in some ways, it reminds me of your abundance framework
Mm,
and that you talk about like the anatomy of abundance.
yeah.
And so I would say one, I feel like really rooted in my identity and like who I am as
Mhm.
a person, as I actually have like also Ethiopian ancestry. So like an
Ooh,
Afro-Caribbean Ethiopian
yeah.
who was born and raised in the Virgin Islands and has like 6, 7 plus generations of ancestry in this particular space. I think the other part of it is I'm just like really committed to like my wellness practices. So like I walk 10,000 steps a day. I try to like eat in ways that are really nourishing and grounding for me. I really believe in community. And so I have, a family, of course, that I really love, siblings, my parents, my kids, my ex-husband, as well as friends from like the Virgin Islands, from grad school, from business networks. And so I just really believe that we are a part of a larger whole. And
Yes.
that is really important to remember that we are not alone in this world,
Hmm.
we are in community with others, and
Hmm.
that is a part of the beauty of being alive. And then I have to say faith. I was raised very Christian,
Yeah.
and I also tend to study some of the African and indigenous like spiritual traditions. And I just really believe that our souls are eternal and that this lifetime is just like a blip in the grand scheme
Agree.
of our spirit's journeys. And
Mhm.
so I feel like, okay, I came to earth with a destiny and a purpose. I came to earth to refine my character. In the Ifa tradition, we would call it Iwapwele, good character. And so, if my role is to fulfill my destiny, to be a part of my community, to become a good ancestor when it's my time to transition, then it allows me to be really focused on the
Mhm.
things that I truly believe that I came to Earth to do.
Yeah.
And so I joke I don't have the luxury of despair
Yeah.
because there are present and future generations that are counting on me to do my part.
Yeah.
Um, and Frantz Fanon used to say in one of his books, he said every generation has to find their ongoing part in the ongoing struggle for liberation and fulfill it or betray it.
Mhm.
And that's a paraphrase, but it really stuck with me
Yeah.
because I just remember saying and thinking, okay, I don't have to solve every issue. I just have to run my leg
Yeah.
of the race and I can fulfill or betray my leg of the race. And so that's where I'm focused. What is my part in the
Beautiful.
ongoing liberation struggle? This is what
Yeah.
this is.
That's beautifully articulated and so true. And I do believe very similarly, but I've never been able to articulate it that way. There's a lot of different spaces where I don't exercise my voice, but in the spaces where I know this is my purpose and what I'm here for and here to disrupt, I'm always going to exercise my voice. And so tell me a little bit about, because it took me a long time to develop the confidence to really go there when it comes to speaking out and being a stand, right? There was an evolution. And so you still are quite young. I know you're probably like, I'm not young, I got kids, but but you know how it is. In the grand scheme of thing, I'm young. I'm about to be 52 and I'm still young. But with that said, in regard to your voice, was there ever a time where you felt stagnant in your voice, where you felt stifled in your voice? Because you're so confident, you're so well spoken, you're so grounded in your purpose, you're very educated. But was there ever a time that you struggled with that, that you questioned or second guessed yourself?
This is such a great question. And I would say that there was a time when I felt confused about how to weave together various skills, talents, interests, and strengths. And
Yeah.
so, somebody who is like interested in spirituality, also interested in community organizing, formally trained as an academic or a scholar or professor, and then also deeply creative. So I write poetry, I write short fiction, and I find myself thinking of myself as an artist and
Mhm.
often a very creative soul. And there were moments of doubt and of hesitation and uncertainty around the question of, can all of these aspects of my identity and my work live together
Mhm.
under one person, one brand, one framework? And I found that really challenging for a while, especially because I think a lot of traditional, even business advice,
Mhm.
is really about like niching down, finding your focus, articulating your offers in ways that are very single focused and clear
Mhm.
for clients to understand. And so it took me really some time to comfortably say, actually, I'm very multi hyphenate, and that's a strength, and I can create. um One of the language that I like is rhizomatic, these like non-hierarchical, very organic, non-linear ways
I love it.
of being. And so, yeah, that took me a while.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious actually about how you do this as well. I know that I'm just so impressed by how long you have been doing this work.
Yeah.
Someone who's been, on YouTube for like over a decade, and I believe you told me in this space for over 30 years.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, how do you stay like focused
I've
and
had a very
like,
similar journey in regard to being, as you said, a multi hyphenate. And it's funny because I was talking to my two younger ones today, and they're and my youngest was like, because they see me set up, I'm doing the podcast shooting today, and they're like, he's like, Mom, I don't really know what you do. And so we're having this conversation, and my second to the youngest, he chimes in and he's like, "Well, mom's very like diverse, and she's always shifting and pivoting and da da da, da, but it kind of stays the same, you know." And I think the answer to that is that I've always had the confidence, the conviction in what I'm here to do, that I was willing to take steps forward even when I didn't know. I didn't really have a guarantee that things were going to work. I was willing to fail forward and experiment and test things out until I found what worked for me. And so I think in a lot of ways, I just was always willing to be different. And so even the anatomy of abundance framework that you mentioned, that came about from initially being a hardcore like entertainer. I was a singer, I was a model, I was acting, I was like promoting hip hop clubs and like different stuff, right? I was just exploring my creative, like you said. Then that transitioned into the wellness industry where I became a esthetician and a massage therapist. And then that took me down my spiritual path. I too was raised in a Christian environment, but very regimented, right? Very conditioned. And it took me a long time to break free from all of the conditioning from the religion. And once I found spirituality, I feel like that is where the portal really opened up for me. You bring together spirituality and creativity
right.
alongside a brain that knows how to be grounded and analytical and organized, and you're unstoppable. And so that is literally how the anatomy of abundance was born. It was living through these phases of, artistry to wellness industry to then starting to coach back in like 2000, 2000, 2002, like when it wasn't even a thing back then, coaching, to then developing into speaking and writing books. And as it all came together, I wasn't afraid to tweak. So I think our journeys are very parallel, and it's really fun to hear it from your perspective for two reasons. One, because you're someone who did have that grounding, that cultural grounding, that tight-knit community and family and deep cultural roots. I didn't have that. I mean, I was the girl who grew up people saying, "Oh, you think you're white," or this or that, just not really knowing my space in the world. So the contrast of our journeys to end up in the same place is very fascinating. So thank you for asking. But this isn't about me. So let's move on. So with that, I want you to talk more about where you're at now. We've heard a lot about where you came from and some of those experiences and how that shaped you. But where are you at now? Because there is a component of your work that includes art, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I joke I'm a mission, vision, and values girly,
Yes.
uh, through and through. And so the two main ways that I tend to channel that is one, I have a nonprofit that I started. I co-founded it with one of my cousins. It's called St. Janko, the St. John Heritage Collective, and we're a land rights and cultural heritage preservation nonprofit that's based in the Virgin Islands. And
Mm,
so one of our main arguments is that if you're going to preserve culture and heritage, people have to be able to live
mhm,
in the community. And so we started to think about like decolonization and how to like push back against like gentrification and to actually have a bit of economic justice so that Virgin Islanders can remain home and continue to keep like our culture alive and thriving. And so we do several things in terms of like education and programming and like community advocacy work around like environmental and climate issues. But one of my favorite things that we do is we host an annual St. John Arts Festival. And
Ooh.
that is just always a blessing.
Yeah.
And in my consultancy, I run the Ouroboros House. We're a boutique consultancy and design firm that's also based in the Virgin Islands, and we offer like art, social impact, and business advising. And so, really, at the core of our work is helping CEOs and helping brands to define their mission, vision, and values, and then
Hmm.
craft like spaces and customer journeys and marketing material that are just really true to who the founder is, but also really true to the brand's mission, vision, and values. And so in the Ouroboros House, we have code and ethics lab for coaches that we just launched, and that's coming up the 19th to the 21st of September. And I'm just super excited about it because the goal is really to give that mission, vision, and values work to solopreneurs and to coaches in particular who are just really trying to think about how can I be purposeful? How can I
Hmm.
stay in my values? How do I, market and price and sell and run my ops in a way that's just true to what I truly believe is in integrity as a coach, as a person. And so I'm really excited and again grateful to be able
Hmm.
to hold space in this way and to do this work.
Yeah, it sounds like you do so many different things, but at the core of it, it's the same mission, same purpose. And I like to call the way that you're living at an early age, right? I got there a lot later in life, but I like to call this embodied abundance. And that's really where you're bringing together the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, the physical. I heard you say you're taking care of your body, you're taking care of your mind, you're taking care of your psyche, you're taking care of everything, right? You're very intentional about those things. But then you're also not just leaning on I'll just say the woo woo, right? Because that's what people look at it, the woo woo. But you're also implementing these very grounding and organized strategies for taking the steps forward. So it's not like you're an anomaly and you're doing this because of all of these practices and all of that. You actually have some strategy and some a roadmap that you're following, right? And so,
Yeah.
can you share with me what is your future vision? Right. So we know where you're at now. We know what you're doing. You're doing the consultancy. You're infusing your art, your creativity. You're bringing all parts of yourself together and doing it in a very beautiful way. What would be future casting? What would you like to see yourself develop or see shift in the world with your help over the next, let's just say, 5 years?
Yeah, I really like to describe it as I would love to see people like institutionalize love.
Hmm.
And I know sometimes that just seems really like woo-woo, but Dr. King had this quote where he would say power without love is like reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic.
Yeah.
And so I take that to mean that it's one thing to say that we love ourselves and that we love each other,
Mhm.
but we actually need systems and strategies and organizations and institutions that really embody love and our
Yes.
commitment to caring for ourselves and wanting the best for ourselves and for each other.
Yeah.
And so if we're future casting, I would say that, St. Janko and the Ouroboros House would continue to do this work of expanding our capacity to love through
Mm.
really people to root in mission, in vision, in values, in environmental stewardship, in creativity and art. And then I also would have to say that I love politics. And so I would continue to get more involved in Virgin Islands politics in particular.
Wow. That's a beautiful vision. And I have to say I love, what did you say, institutionalizing love?
Yes.
Love is the third core value of mine. So it's love obviously would be the first, the most overarching value, love, play, and then freedom. But with love, I believe that that's part of why I've been able to move into so many different spaces is because I always lead with love. And you're the first person I've heard put that into a structure, which I think is phenomenal because I like to say that I am doing intimacy at scale. So with the podcast, with the retreats, with the books, everything is like I want people to feel like they're really connected, deeply connected and in intimate spaces, even when they're not. Like we're not even in the same room, but there's this feeling of like connection and intimacy. And so I love that you did that. You live the anatomy of abundance framework. You're very much in the ethereal realms while also being grounded on this plane and tackling real issues and making change. So I just think that's phenomenal. So then if we're speaking to the audience who's listening right now, as we start to round out this conversation, what would be for someone who's out there who might be in a bit of a transition, right? They're still trying to fit into society's box that they've been told to, right? You're supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. If you're this, you can't be that, right? All of these things that we all have to do, we all have to deal with. Um, what would you tell them in regard to really owning and claiming their own authenticity, their sovereignty, stepping into their purpose, while also impacting and being a model for others? What would be some steps to take?
I would say the first thing that you absolutely have to do is to audit your values and
Mm,
to write down your mission
mhm,
or missions. Because I find that when we don't necessarily know what we believe or why, and when we are unclear on what our purpose may or may not be, it's easy to feel like you're adrift.
mhm,
And so sometimes people might say, "Oh, I don't know how to audit my values. I don't know how to make sense of what I believe." And one of my favorite things to ask clients to do sometimes is to create like a values audit of your calendar and
mhm.
to literally, look at what you do on a day-to-day basis and
Uh-huh.
ask yourself, why do I do this?
Mhm.
How do I feel about doing this? And why do I feel that way? about doing this. And
Mhm.
I find that when you look at this, you sometimes get a clear sense of, yeah,
Yes.
really, I'm living in my truth. My calendar is filled with all of these wellness activities, or it's filled with really connecting with like friends and family members, or I spend like a lot of time actually trying to kind of clean up my environment or like decorate my space. And so you start to get these little like peeks at what you believe. And then one of the other reasons why it's good to kind of ask yourself, like, oh, how do you feel about it? Is because sometimes there are things on your calendar that you kind of resent. And you do it, but it feels icky and you hate it. And
Yes.
you know, the why behind why you hate it tells you so much about what you believe. And whether that's my calendar is too full, now you know, okay, I value a certain degree of spaciousness, some time for self-care. If you find that you're engaging in the I would say you're on many boards and you find yourself feeling like you hate doing that, it might tell you that there's something that feels inauthentic to you about the communication or
Mhm.
about the mission of those boards, right? And so basically doing that audit of your
Mhm.
values and then asking yourself, well, why do I think I came to Earth? And I know that's a big question, but I think sometimes big questions are worth grappling and, you know,
Mhm.
struggling. And so, what is your mission? What
Mhm.
is the thing that you feel like you were uniquely designed to do? What is the thing that brings you the most joy? If you had to choose, where would you focus your efforts and why? And for me, I think it was decolonization. You know, growing
Yeah.
up in me, I was like, no, there's something wrong about being colonized in the 2000s.
You think?
Right. So I was driven by that. But I think we each have
Yeah.
a thing or two. For my mother, it's family. She's like,
Mhm.
I'm here to love my children to the best of my ability and to care for my husband and to take
Mhm.
care of my home and to run a business that allows my family to thrive. And
Mhm.
so sometimes I think we look at other people's mission and we think
Exactly.
that we adopt it, but you gotta look in the mirror.
Yeah, strip it away. And you used one of my favorite words, which is audit. I audit everything, and a lot of people don't understand what that means. So I love that you articulated exactly what that looks like. Like, what are the areas that are working for me? They feel good for me mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, right? And what are the areas where I'm like resentful or I dread or that drain my energy? And that's exactly what an audit is, whether it's your time, your emotions, your finances. I do have one last question for you, just because I was curious earlier and I didn't ask. Um, and let me see, what's the best way to say this? So, a lot of times with colonization conversations and this type of social justice conversation, I'll say, work, um, there can be a fine line of victimhood. And I don't feel that from you. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit of your perspective in regard to that, how, some people will perceive this kind of a conversation as being a victim, but also how that works for you or what that looks like for you in regard to creating wealth,
Yeah,
right?
I
Because
love
there's people
that.
that are kind of afraid of, like, if I'm an activist and if I'm, fighting against this, then I can't be that. Talk to that, speak to that for me.
Yeah. One of the things I love about this question is it's probably one of the things that I struggled a lot with on the journey, and it took me a while to really start to figure it out.
Hmm.
And so I for sure had a young, angry era.
Well,
And
there you
in that
go.
young, angry era, I'm pretty sure a lot of people accused me of like having a victimhood mentality around uh, organizing and decolonial work. And I think one of the things I recognized when I was younger, and you write the petitions, you go to the protests, you do the protests,
Hmm.
um, but when it's all said and done, the decision makers make the decisions,
Right.
and the decision makers have decision making authority to
Hmm.
make decisions. And so when I audited how I felt about the work that I was doing, I realized that, oh no, this is really draining and
Mm,
it's stressful
hmm
and it's bad for my health. And the additional stress is bad even for many other organizers' health.
mm,
So I started to even kind of witness like the health impacts and outcomes of other community organizers, even anecdotally, even other academics, right?
mm,
And I realized that I didn't want that for me and my children and my community and my fellow organizers. And so it raised, I think, questions about wealth and about power. And I had to look in the mirror and ask myself, do I want to have to always be asking people in positions of power to do what I want them to do?
hmm
Or do I want the most marginalized amongst us to have power
hmm
and to be included in decision-making processes and to have the resources and the sovereignty to be able to determine the outcomes of our lives. And one of the blessings I think about growing up in such a small community is that so many of the entrepreneurs and the government officials looked like me. And so both of my parents were entrepreneurs. I grew up in real estate and transportation businesses that my parents, I would argue, built brick by brick. Like when we were super young, we were very poor. And by the time I finished grad school, we were more financially stable as a family.
mm,
And so I remember just looking at my dad one day. I think he was just like closing the curtain and looking out the glass door for the porch. And I just flashed back to like when we had a little tiny one bedroom apartment and the toilet didn't flush and we had like one pair of shoes and we would haul water to be able to kind of get it going, and how, he was a janitor and a sanitation worker for most of my childhood. And then now, and my mother was like a college student. And now for most of my adulthood, I think we live a relatively very like financially stable and secure and somewhat privileged life. And while I want systems change,
hmm
I recognize that I have to do the work
hmm
to help facilitate that systems change.
hmm
And so I often try to have that conversation
hmm
with other organizers, with other activists, with other creatives. And it's a difficult conversation, I think, to have because I don't want to victim blame.
mm
And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes we have to save each other and ourselves, and that there might not be someone else coming to save us.
hmm
And also, when I look at the, I would say, more fascist leaning politics in the US and across the world, the
Yeah.
thing that really scares me the most is they are very organized. They are
hmm
very organized and they really work hard, okay, to design policies and systems to harm.
hmm
And so those of us who want to love also need to be organized, and we
hmm
also need to work hard, and we also need to believe in our individual and collective capacity
hmm
to change the world. Yeah, so that's
Love it.
how I describe it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're giving yourself permission to be the hero in your story and to be the hero to other people as well, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. And supporting the heroes around me.
Yeah.
I find that when I look around at other organizers, other activists, people who have been doing this work for generations, I sometimes joke that I feel like I'm a really good supporting character in our collective liberation story,
hmm
And so I think sometimes it's important to be able to look around and to say, who's doing the work to make the world better and how can I
hmm
support them?
Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
actually I actually love that because I believe that the supporters are the less what do you call it? The unsung heroes. Those are the ones who you may not see in the forefront, and yet they're the glue of everything, right? So
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I have an aunt like that who is such a supportive person. She's always aligning with causes and people that she really believes in, and doesn't have to be in the forefront, but she's the machine behind everything. And so I think it's wonderful. And I think it's a role. I think you can also be both. I think you
I
can
think
be the
so.
leader and the
Yeah.
hero while also being able to support other heroes and leaders in the mission. So that collaboration piece is huge for me as well. I've seen that power over and over and over again. So,
Absolutely. And even your living room wisdom echoes
yeah.
that and, embodies it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
everything I do, I really try to infuse this collaboration, coming together as leaders with all of our wisdom, and bringing that forth to make the world a better place in all of the different aspects. And so, thank you for acknowledging that. This has been amazing. Like, I adore you. I absolutely adore you. I love your brain. I'm a bit of a sapiosexual, so I'm so stimulated from this conversation, and just your groundedness, your peace, your joy, your embodiment, everything about you is amazing. And I'm excited to just witness what happens for you in this world, and the change that you're going to impact. So, as we get ready to lead off here, I'd love for you to just share with everybody where you hang out virtually so that if they want to connect with you, they can.
Yeah. And, thanks again for having me. This has been such a warm and like beautiful, like you have such a generous like
Yeah.
spirit.
Thank you.
And so I appreciate you having me on and having this conversation. And I'm online. I'm on Instagram, on LinkedIn, also on Facebook, as well as I have a website, hadiyasewer.com, and all of my accounts are under my name.
Great.
Um, Ouroboros House is on Instagram under its name, and St. Janko is also on Instagram and Facebook under its name.
Okay. So we'll
So
put all of this in the show notes as well. But I just know sometimes we're on all the channels, but we hang out on one. So it sounds like Instagram is very prominent for you then.
you know what's really hilarious? I did a 6 month like social media break.
Okay, smart.
I really loved it. And so I have to actually say that my newsletter
Okay,
is where I hang out the most. And so I publish it now through Substack. And
wonderful.
that's where all the weekly drips of thoughts and love notes is what I call
Okay.
them
I
come
love
out.
that. So we will definitely put that in show notes because I'm the same way. I'm on all the social media channels, but if you want to get me, that's my weekly emails. I
Yeah.
just I feel like when if social media ever goes away or when it does, like TikTok got snatched. Fortunately, I was never really on there anyway at that point, but it got snatched and brought back.
Mhm.
When it comes to the control and the sovereignty and really being in your own power, I do feel like email is the one thing we do own. So that's
Right.
something we can continue with. So I love that. I just think
Yeah.
you're such a smart woman. And I'm excited to just continue a friendship or whatever this turns into. I'm just very honored to know you. And I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this interview today has taken something that will change their life for the better. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, audience, for listening, tuning in to another episode. Please leave us a review, questions, comments. Make sure you subscribe and share this podcast. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same channel, right here in the living room where your story is your glory. Bye.